Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Adele Newton. I'm the Executive Director of CSCAN InfoCan, and thanks for attending this really important conversation today on industry-university interaction. I'm really pleased to introduce our two participants in the conversation. Our president of CSCAN, our newly elected president of CSCAN, Mark Frappier, is going to interview our guest or speak with our guest. Mark is a professor of software engineering in the Department of Computer Science at the University of Sherbrooke. His research interests focus on the formal specification, synthesis, and construction of software and its applications to security and model-based testing. Mark has published more than 100 papers in international journals and conferences and co-edited 2 books. Especially important for this conversation, before joining the University of Sherbrooke, Mark worked for over 5 years in industry as a consultant, senior analyst, and project manager for several companies. And Mark is also the first recipient of the CSCAN InfoCan Distinguished Service Award in 2019. Thanks, Mark, for leading the conversation with our guest, Stephen Wood. So Stephen has worked in software development, academic and industrial research, and technical leadership for more than 30 years. As co-founder of 3 software and services companies based in the US, Quack.com, Kinitos, and NeoEdge Networks. He built strong, high-performing teams of product and technical experts based in both Silicon Valley and the Waterloo-Toronto tech corridor. One of these companies, Quack.com, pioneered the world's first interactive voice assistant and was acquired by Netscape America Online in 2000. Stephen served at Google from 2008 until this year, 2021, building and leading a world-class engineering and product capability team in Canada and growing a range of multidisciplinary engineering and development teams and leadership from 20 to over 1,300 people. Stephen holds a Bachelor of Science in Computer Science from the University of Saskatchewan and a Master's and PhD in Computer Science Math from the University of Waterloo. Among numerous awards, Stephen has received the prestigious J.W. Graham Medal in Computing and Innovation from the University of Waterloo in 2010 and was recognized with a Distinguished Lifetime Achievement Award from the University of Saskatchewan in 2021. So gentlemen, I am going to take myself off video and let you proceed. Let me just add that if you have questions or comments you'd like to make, please put them in the chat, and after the conversation, we can open up the conversation with everyone in the webinar. So I'll leave it to you, gentlemen.
Thanks, Adele. And thank you, Steve, for accepting our invitation. That's very kind of you, and we're very happy to welcome you on this webinar series. So let's start by asking you to tell us about yourself. What sparked your interest into computer science?
Yeah, I'm sort of a lifelong software person. I started writing software when I was 13, writing games on a VIC-20 originally. And really just sort of stuck with it as a hobby first. I've always enjoyed math. I've always been good at math. And that's sort of back in the day, as they say apparently now, they used to funnel people who liked math and computers into what was then the burgeoning computer science discipline. So I sort of got suckered into it. I was planning to be an attorney, but it never really happened. So I just stuck with it. And I'm from Northern Saskatchewan. My professors there advised several of us to come to the University of Waterloo. And during many disparate paths, I found myself doing a master's, eventually a PhD there, and have really enjoyed a career in research and then in corporate technology ever since.
And what led you to pursue a master's and a PhD? What were your motivations and interests in the...
Right. Well, I'm somebody who gets bored pretty easy. And so when I went out into corporate software development in the, when the heck was that? Late 80s, I guess. I did it for a few years, realized I really disliked it. I didn't find it challenging. I didn't find it interesting. I didn't find it engaging. And I had 2 choices: move somewhere where the work was more interesting or come back and learn something new. And I tended to lean on the learn something new. And at the time, that was part of maybe the second big phase of artificial intelligence, probably. now being the transformative major phase, maybe, I don't know. And so the place to do that was either U of T or University of Waterloo at that time. And so I came to the University of Waterloo because of its intersection with industry, actually. So I was very fortunate to get a wonderful supervisor who then let me get away once, but then suckered me back to come for the PhD.
Okay. And did you consider doing a career in academia, or you, at the end of your PhD, you decided to go to industry? And
I did. I've never really liked teaching. It turns out that's a problem. If you want to be so, but I did. I was offered a couple of faculty jobs. I did the tour that one does. I opted to do a postdoc instead to pursue some more of my work further, and then did another brief academic tour and interviews. Was offered a couple of really interesting opportunities, but then took the plunge back into research in research intersections with corporations for a while, and then went my own way in corporate. But yes, no, I absolutely did. One brief anecdote, I taught introduction to software development for engineers at my postdoc university. I failed 34% of the class, and it was suggested to me by the department head that perhaps this wasn't for me.
too stringent, yeah. So, so you've worked on a range of university and industry collaborations over the years. Can you describe a few of them that work well?
Yeah, I have. I worked for a while, actually. I've done a number, actually. I worked with Department of National Defense in Canada at the Valcartier in Quebec for about a year between my master's and PhD. I think that was very interesting. That was a sort of a, it's not exactly corporate, but it was a very specifically product-driven initiative, you know, where academic kind of work in artificial intelligence and constraint reasoning was being brought into a particular Canadian defense-oriented initiative. And so there was a lot of really interesting collaborations. The work was funded by National Defense, but at the same time, it was a bridging effort into academia. I thought it worked very well. You know, the outcome was productized. The research was, you know, we found a way to make it bridging into a publishable environment, and worked really well. It wasn't, however, you know, corporate from the point of view of third party. And then I also worked at Carnegie Mellon for a while in a similarly structured thing that involved U.S. corporations. And that was, you know, the United States has an enormous amount of money focused in certain research areas. And so that was DARPA initiative. And in that case, I would say as well, it worked reasonably well with very large corporations doing basically analysis and revisions of their software to make them functional and survivable in very, very important defense initiatives. So it was, again, they worked pretty well. There was good collaborations. In that case, there's lots of money. I think in the case of maybe my last 13 years working with Google, we had quite a few really great programs from Google with academia. I think some that were globally scaled, obviously always a goal with Google. Some that were locally initiated, some of which were pretty successful, some of which were not. And I think it's really hard to understand exactly why. I think when we found faculty and supported them in their research areas where we had interest, and just basically we're saying, hey, we think what you're doing is great. Can we help you? Can we provide some money to you? Here's a program. I think it was really successful. In cases where we tried to be more directive and say, hey, we're really interested in this area. Is there anybody we could pull together to work on this area? I think maybe they were less successful. I'm not really sure why.
Okay. And how did these initial opportunities came up? How did you make the first contacts or build the interactions with these companies?
In the context of Google, Google had at one time a very, very active, very, very large research outreach program with the intent of just basically supporting basic computer research, computer science research, related research in things like semiconductors and things like that. And you know, tried to take a view that it's what's the right word? It's one way to meet its kind of obligations for giving back to the community was basically just to fund basic research in areas of interest, where they felt that there was alignment and maybe they could provide either a collaboration or maybe create interest in sabbaticants coming to Google, or basically just creating good relationships for the research teams at Google, really with no dramatic goals in mind other than, advancing compute or whatever. And so I think those, like I said, were very good. Like, I think we had some great ones. And then you could do initiatives at Google internally and locally and regionally. And we did some that were pretty successful, especially with Sabbaticans, grad students. Data sharing is hard, but it can be done. And I think I would say that we took advantage of whatever we could that was available at the corporate level and tried to pull as much of it as we could into our academic friends in Canada and make it available to them, talk about the programs, talk about the research grants available. Some of them were pretty great. And then we often tried to initiate our own partnerships with less success. Like we were very interested at one time in the intersection of mobility, mobile computing, privacy rights, and a bunch of things like that we just weren't going to do experiments on, right? We're not doing that. And so it was like, well, but we're very interested in what works, what's acceptable, what people think. And we tried to get an initiative going around that. And that involved having to pull together a lot of faculty into a new kind of grant program. And it was just hard because there wasn't a passionate leader in the overall group. It was like more this lab and this lab and this lab. And that's not our strength in academia.
So I see that Google is more in the spirit of free research, whereas companies sometimes have very specific objectives when they start collaborations with academia. So what would you suggest so that these more specific or more very specific objectives for the research, how would you manage these and try to...
Well, I'm a firm believer in sort of academic independence, and I love, like, for example, like some of the intellectual property agreements that the University of Waterloo provides its students, and as an example, I just happen to be more familiar with that, and faculty in terms of ownership of intellectual property they develop. So I'm a big fan of that. And so I think a clear understanding of who owns what going in, really key. A clear understanding of what's kind of trying to be mutually advanced, what that shared area of interest is. When we were doing the program, we tried to pull together some great researchers in different areas that we had great regard for and ask them if they'd be interested, if we funded an initiative of a certain amount of money, would they be interested in bringing a grad student or two themselves, their knowledge, and pursuing it? They weren't forced to do it, they did. And I think what was lacking at that time, and many sort of look back exercises, was project management. And whether it's just somebody to pull together the status, it's just the kind of thing we would do by matter of course in a corporate software development environment. Just bringing that kind of agility into that academic environment in a way that worked for grad students and faculty and for corporations, I think was the thing missing.
Because one of the difficulty with the university industry collaborations is that students have to take courses. So the time it takes for them to develop the research is probably longer than what is typically allowable for the industry, because they typically want results in a very short time period. And that's quite incompatible with the academic environment where you have to train students and bring them up to speed over 1 or 2 or 3 years sometimes. So
that makes sense. Absolutely. Totally makes sense. So I think we did one where I think there was a mutual, like, as we headed into the pandemic in like February, March, April of 2020, Google did a lot of really interesting things trying to advance their scientific capacity across the board, whether it was, operational health and safety, raw research efforts that could be funded, or advanced on everything from fast vaccines designed to, safer work environments and air filtration or whatever. And one of the great things we wanted to do was, we had a fair bit of capacity in some of these related areas, and we just didn't know where to go to help, to be meaningful and useful. And one of the things I think we did with a specific university was we basically said, look, we know there's a lot of interesting things going on there. We just don't know what it is, right? And there's a bunch of things going on here, and we suspect you don't know what they are. And we sort of took it upon ourselves to create a matchmaking effort, really, more than anything, ourselves. Just like we said, okay, we're going to invest our own time in this. We're going to put our own resources to it. We're going to take a couple of our scientific engineering kind of intersection people, and we would just like to find out. So if you could ask your faculty, just send us like a 1-page overview of everything they think is important. we will read them all. And then we will try to match them to our people, and we will send you as much as we can about ours. And we did that. And I think it was very successful. And I think the funny thing about all of that is it was really basically done with a spreadsheet, right? Like we eventually found 3 or 4 really promising areas of intersection, connected the people involved, and then supported them with resources. And some great things came out of that. I can't specifically name the people because it's of confidentiality things, but it was a very successful thing. And it was just matchmaking, but it took time, it took energy, it took commitment.
So you did this by doing some kind of call to the general university environment and finding people that would be interested into this. So are there different ways of doing it where you would use your relationships and contacts, and is that the usual way of finding your best partners for doing collaborative research?
Absolutely. Having regular conversations with leaders of the university, leaders of the research, just faculty members that we know has led to some really great things. Like whether it's a specific thing like with the sort of response to the pandemic, where there's a lot of shared urgency and shared national interest, it's sort of a natural opportunity where you could get attention at the high level. And we're able to involve local health officials and researchers, as well as potentially government ones, actually, depending on politics. But I found that to be the most useful. Like we did some great things with just, hey, we've read some really interesting things that your team has produced. Would you come and just give us a talk, and then we'll tell you some stuff about what we're thinking, and we'd just love to see if there's a way to work together. Some great things have come out of that kind of conversation in a company that had a lot of resources that we could direct if we needed to, or we felt it was justified. Everything from building more diverse engineering teams by understanding the psychology of what's happening, because we often didn't understand what was happening, and just asking. It turns out asking experts is a pretty useful thing to do. Like, hey, would you look at our material and tell us why we're not succeeding? And the insights were amazing, which I think some of those actually led to us deciding to fund like a chair in diversity, a specific university, and yeah, I mean, just talking, right? Taking the time to talk and listen and hopefully read what's being produced is useful.
Yeah. And are there collaborations that have promise right now? Which one would you?
I'm no longer employed by Google, and so I've now turned to the dark side, even darker side for some of you maybe. But like I'm now working for Innovia Capital Partners as a venture capital person, working with CTOs across the country. So that's an interesting point. I would say the one thing that I'm advising a lot of CTOs in the country to do is to get more involved with their academic partners, to let them understand the interesting problems that they are having, to spend time. They often don't have time. They think they have no time, right? Because they're so busy trying to launch things. To just step back a bit and realize that while they do have short-term obligations, that their long-term opportunity of finding these points of advice, points of insight, people who are taking the time to think ahead a bit, can be enormously valuable. And I think they don't realize sometimes what they bring, which can often be real world experience, real data, real problems that have a very short-term potential, not short-term is the wrong word, but very real, relatively clear, realizable path to monetization. And oftentimes people in an academic environment are looking for those good data sets, for those good places where people can apply their work. So I think it is a challenge, particularly with smaller companies. And for bigger companies, you end up with a lot of, it's that middle, you end up with a lot of, what's the right word, corporate overhead. But in the middle, relatively successful companies that are still fairly nimble and agile and have money, Shopify comes to mind, are great opportunities in my mind.
And how do you see the publications restrictions sometimes that are imposed on the university industry collaborations? Sometimes results cannot be published as is; they must be adapted or reduced, or some parts of it must be kept a secret for a while. So,
yeah, and I go back to where I was before. I'm sort of a huge believer in publication, and that science is. I'm a purist, to be quite honest. Like I'm a scientist first, a corporate kind of denizen second, and so I believe in publishing things as much as possible. I also believe in patent protection of intellectual property. So I think that's the beauty of protecting it and then publishing it, is that, getting it protected and then letting the world know about what's possible allows other people to build on it. So I'm a big believer in that. I can only really on a corporate level speak. I can't speak for Google at all. I'm not allowed to, but like, I don't work for them anymore. But I found their environment to be very pro publishing. Like, everyone was, engineering teams were frequently pretty aggressively encouraged to remain relevant in academia. I mean, it's challenged to keep your career versus your academic interests. And I strongly encouraged our researchers to keep that part of their lives going, and to not overly prioritize career goals, which quite often are not well aligned with spending a bunch of time publishing. Corporations tend to overvalue, in my opinion, short-term launches. And Google's very metrics driven. What's the current goal? What are we going to do? How do we get it to happen? How do we move from 3 to 5 on whatever metric is we're using? But is reasonably good at assigning credit for publications to researchers. So it's not ideal, but it is pretty good. So most work could be published. And if you talk to some of the really deep core researchers like Jeff Hinton, I mean, they're just adamant about it. Like, we are going to publish. We're going to publish everything we can. And it's true. There are some things that could be very sensitive corporate information. But it is actually much smaller than people think. Most primary research is published as quickly as possible.
Interesting. What are the most important results of the university collaborations? Typically, you would think of the immediate results of the project, but sometimes also there are byproducts. For instance, the students which were trained during the projects becomes very useful resources for the companies. And so, what overall, how do you see the where are the best results of such a collaboration, and how should it be used by the companies and also by the university?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I mean, it's not surprisingly almost easy to cherry pick the obvious ones. I think, speaking as somebody who came into computer science with a massive passion in science fiction and robotics, and was a relatively competent software developer prior to going into that area, I think seeing what has happened in the advancement of neural networks, and even in statistical machine learning, since say 1990, in the 20-year period between then and now, is almost impossible to have imagined. Like, I think I was a statistical machine learning person at best. I was more of a constraint semantic person at I would have said it best. Now I would say it worst. And there was a time, and it was certainly around 1995-6, where just demonstrably a semantic constraint-based approach to some of these problems around robotics was at least workable, right? And could be shown in specific categories of problems, to result in great things. And some of the stuff went to space, controls the way satellites work, and a bunch of other things. And now they look like toys, right? And it's quite frustrating if you spend like me 6 years on your PhD or whatever. I didn't, but I mean, the 3 years on my PhD to get that, and then see what Jeff Hinton and Yoshua Benjo and the others have done, Rich Sutton, to change the world in that regard is pretty mesmerizing. And I knew Jeff back then a little bit, and like, he was wrong and I was right, and then we were really, really, really wrong, and he was really, really, really right. And I guess that work, which was academic in all of its origination, right, and driven by someone and some set of people who believed they were right, and they would just stick with it because they believed fundamentally it was right for reasons that were very hard to explain, turned out to actually, in fact, be right. And that once materials science and operating system design, computer design got to a point where they could actually try their algorithms at the proper scale, we're like, oh, and there, it works, ta-da. And you're like, okay. And then you see the applications of that. It's sort of mesmerizing, right? Like, there was a time when I was at Google in, I don't know, rough years, like call it 2010, 11, when basically all of its core kind of search infrastructure ran on one type of machine learning. And then within a period of short-term period, like three or 4 years, was completely transformed by neural networks in all aspects. And so I mean, that's pretty transformative, and that's just one company. That's across industry after industry after industry. So, I mean, that's got to be the biggest example. And I think, I mean, that work, certainly there has been a lot of corporate efforts to acquire that work, but I think for the most part, the key initiatives have been well published, are well shared across the industry and across the world. So I think that's probably the best example that I can see today. I'm sure there are many others, but that one's in my mind.
It was a really great breakthrough. So were there collaborations that didn't work, and why? And what lessons did you learn from them?
Yeah, I mentioned the one, probably lack of product management coordination, understanding, as you pointed out, the deadlines, the different kinds of constraints on grad students and faculty members who have their own commitments to their own primary research rather than a secondary program. I would say that's the biggest one. Google had a philosophy which I really liked, which we fought a bit, which was, hey, we want to partner with the best lab in whatever in the world. One, just pick one, right? Like, who's the best lab in this? Which lab is the best lab in that? Find that, fund them. If we're aligned with that, put our researchers there, ask them to come visit us. Let's do that, right? It's sort of a metric, right? Who's the best? I don't like it because it's so subjective and it doesn't say the word candidate in as much as I would like. And therefore, like, that wouldn't be my goal. But I think there's wisdom in it in a sense, right? Like, if you look in the world right now, where are the places doing the most advanced work across the range of research to application in, say, quantum mechanics? And, there is a Canadian answer to that. There's maybe 3 labs at that scale, maybe 2, depending how you look at it. And, if you're going to partner with somebody, it's almost for sure one of those 3. Is that a good choice? I don't know. Like they used to say back in the old days, nobody ever went bankrupt. So nobody ever got fired for selecting IBM, right? Like, and I think there's some truth to that. I don't think it's perfect, but I think there is truth. The other thing would be these individual relationships that I mentioned before, just finding the alignment, right? Who in academia is doing something that aligns with your interests? Because then you will put time in and they will put time in. Like, it's their interest and it's your interest. You're both aligned. You don't have to convince people to do it. They want to do it. And I think that's actually quite hard at scale, right? Like
chemistry between the researchers and the industrials, and so that the interactions are fluid. And
we all have these stories, right? Like, I wanted to do a postdoc once with a particular researcher who would not return my emails. Right. And I knew him from conferences and things like that, but like, he just would not return my emails. And, I was frustrated. So I just traveled there. And I just waited outside his office in a different country outside of his office till he came back from teaching class. And he goes, "What are you doing here?" I go, "I'm coming to be your new postdoc student." Right. And he goes, "Oh, that'd be great." Right. He just hadn't got around to my email. And I just couldn't wait anymore. And I think that's one thing, but like, finding a way to connect people like this at scale is something I don't think we've done right.
And one of the benefits of the university industry collaboration is the potential for companies to recruit students. So what are some examples of programs that work well to provide the connection between students and potential employers?
Yeah. I have sort of a huge bias, which is really funny because I didn't go to this program, to programs that have cooperative work exchange. I don't think I would have said that like when I was in university. I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have. I did my undergrad at the University of Saskatchewan, which is a relatively small but really good computer science program, and then my master's and PhD at Waterloo. But I didn't do my undergrad at Waterloo with its sort of its kind of model of computer engineering, computer science, and software engineering, which really strongly encourages in certain threads of work people to spend time as part of the program, or even requires it in industry. That leads to a couple of things that I think are great and a couple of things that are probably not great. Like, the thing that's great about it, if you're an industry person, is that you get people with great primary education who understand actual computer science, not just how to write software. And I'm not trying to exclude engineers. I can't speak for engineers because I'm not an engineer, but like, they certainly come out that way too, with primary engineering experience and research experience, but also know how to build things. And so for a corporation, it's just easy. Like, I mean, hire people from there. Like, they come out, they're better right out of the gate because you don't have to be trained so much. And it's great. It's sort of like cheating. I like cheating. If you're in industry, you want to keep things going as fast as you can, consistent. Are they as good as somebody you might from different research, a different university with a more of a research bent, or a different university which has a different philosophy? No, but in the short term, it's just short-term convenient. And I think that is a pattern that should probably be repeated carefully. I mean, you don't want to produce, in my view, I'm not an academic anymore. Like, I don't think that's a primary goal of universities, is to produce employment. I know others disagree, but it's not my view. I valued my overall education and research skills that I was taught more than specific industrial kind of capabilities, which I learned later. So that's one thought. I think what we're talking about and these matchmaking process with grad students, I think, is critical. I think it doesn't have to be grad students either. Like, some of the best, people we've ever hired in research that came out of undergrad. Like, I don't think there's any reason to be exclusionary. Like, so I'm very interested in this. I'm very interested in new types of programs that people are talking about. There's some going on in our region here locally about, what the best way to do this. I mean, there's a problem in Canada right now, which is true all across the world, but it's particularly acute here, which is, I think since the time I've been involved in building software companies, we've always said, okay, there's roughly somewhere in the Waterloo region itself. I don't know Montreal nearly as well, or Quebec nearly as well, but like in the Waterloo region itself, there's always been between 2,000 and 3,000 open software jobs for the last 20 years. Right now, that number is probably 10 times higher. And the idea about what a region is a little vague at the moment. And so, with the post-pandemic work from home kind of thing. And so my guess is, if I was to put a number on it, we probably could employ in the Greater Toronto region alone somewhere around 50,000 software engineers, software developers that don't exist at the moment. Mm-hmm. And that's going to put all kinds of weird pressures on universities. And with increasing desperation from some companies, I think you're going to see, and I've heard several cases just this week of students leaving school to go and it's a bit like the gold rush at the moment. And I don't necessarily think that's a healthy thing. So, I mean, there's only one real obvious solution to this, and that is immigration. So I have long been a proponent of more skilled immigration. So it is definitely going to be a challenging time. So I think we're going to be forced to come up with some new solutions for this. Good news. Here's some good news. Like, some really great programs have emerged. Google trialed one. It's trialed many things internally, lots of failures. So, like, let's be clear. But like, one was a tremendous success, which was go out to the broader community of universities, quit focusing on the MITs, U of T's, Waterloo, Carnegie Mellon, Stanford, et cetera, and just take a broader view. I mean, there's all these amazing people doing amazing things, and cast a wider net, talk to them, and then just say, here's the kind of thing we need. You do these other things. Like, we will bridge you from that to this if you're interested. And some of those programs, and we will invest time in you, right? Once you've sort of got through the interview gamut. And it's like, okay, we will invest 6 months in showing you how to be a professional software engineer, if that's something that interests you, or a data analyst, say, or a data scientist. And you're obviously really, really smart, and obviously really, really passionate. And we have no idea what skill set we're going to need 2 years from now. But right now, we need this, and we will invest time and energy. And that's been really successful at Google. And I think that tells us a lot about, I think, what we're going to see in the next few years is a lot of training for a specific skill set, which aren't likely to be your lifetime skill set. It's just, you're a smart person who knows how to do research, who knows how to build things, knows how to get things done. Great. Welcome to the team. I hope.
I guess, and to cope with this talent search, do you think the best way to cope with it is to try to come up with short-term training that will be given by universities or companies, or maybe together, to bridge the knowledge gap that is required by the company? Or would it be to bring more people into computer science? But that seems to be quite difficult, because we're doing a lot of publicity and trying to attract people to computer science. I guess in the long,
I mean,
beneficial.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry to cut you off. Like, I think there's many answers there. I think there's some effort. There's a lot of corporations trying to solve this problem, not just for themselves, but as a business model, right? Like, Lambda School is one in the United States, has sort of an interesting model to this, where they bring in great people that can get through kind of a entry-level computer science graduate, kind of like just coming out of school kind of exam. And it's like, okay, great. Now we'll teach you how to be a a production software developer, and then you can get hired easier, and we'll take a percentage of your salary for a while. I mean, that's, to be a little flippant, that's sort of their business model. And I mean, that's been successful in lots of regions. So that's one. I think that's going to happen more. We're seeing some of those in town right now, and in the Waterloo region and in Toronto, I'm seeing some of these. We've talked to some of them for years. Some of them are scaling up, some aren't. I'm not sure, I'm not pitching any of this, by the way. I'm not sure what's the right thing. Like, I think this is university's responsibility to produce employable people. No, I don't. I mean, different people could say that you need to for various reasons, but I don't. I think, do I think we should increase the size of our computer science and engineering and math departments? I do too, but I'm biased, right? Like, I think we should probably do that for physics too, and God knows what else. So, and these days one might want to say, bioinformatics and public health is probably more important. But yes, I think that is a gap. Corporations are going to solve it themselves one way or the other, because they have no choice. It's an imperative. Competitive imperative. And I think that's the danger. I think Google was intentional in this regard. I mean, very, very intentional. Google wanted to be part of technical communities and interesting academic oriented communities worldwide. And they wanted to not destroy those places, like, at all costs. Like, they didn't want to hire everybody. They didn't want to do that. They wanted to come in and be proportionate, right? Like, don't build 30,000 engineering location beside in a community where that would destroy the community. That was never a goal. It would be like, no. Like, monoliths aren't innovative. Let's be part of a culture where people come, people spend time, people go away, young people come in, young people go out, they create companies. We are like, oh, we should have done that. Maybe we'll have to buy that company now. That's great. Like at Google, when people said they're going to leave to create a startup, there was no animosity. I mean, there might have been some tears shed and maybe begging, but at the end of the day, when they went and did it, you're like, oh, that's amazing. How great for you. And like, I think that's a great, healthy culture. I'm not saying it will always be such, but like, I think that has been one of their great successes at Google, is understanding that and not overweighting communities with themselves. The Silicon Valley is a whole different thing. It's just, it doesn't map to anywhere else. But in places like Tel Aviv or Munich or Sydney, Australia, or Waterloo, Greater Toronto region, I think it's been healthier. But now, with all this pressure, our companies all over the world, all this capital available to all of these startups and all of the larger companies right now, I mean, the hiring pressures are intense. And so I think a lot of these things with the pandemic are being bent pretty heavily out of shape. So it's hard to know what the world will look like 2 years from now. But there's a definite risk that a larger percentage of people worldwide will be employed by large, potentially American-led corporations or foreign-led corporations. And even though they may live in a particular country and pay tax in that country, are really not that terribly involved in either the academic involvement or co-academic involvement, or even innovation economy of the local country. I think that's a risk for sure that maybe didn't exist 2 years ago.
Yeah, it is. Change the picture a lot. I've got two questions in the chat, so I'm going to read them so that you can answer them. So, what can companies gain by funding and collaborating on more open-ended basic research?
I think it's a great question. I think the answer is sort of everything in a way, because who knows, right? I mean, that's like, who really does know what you might do? And I think if that research is related to your primary work, you at the very least need to stay involved with it. And what better way to stay involved with developments in the area than to partner with an academic team or lab that its entire mission is to do that. I think it's sort of easy to, and to mutual benefit, like, to say to, I'll just pick on some team, like pick on, I don't know, the local university's team focused on operating system design, or and say, hey, why don't we just get together every 6 weeks and we'll tell you what we're interested in thinking about and what's bothering us, and you tell us what you're working on, and then we'll have some pizza and beer in the olden times. I don't know what we do now online. Hopefully it's back to pizza and beer, frankly. But like, and a lot of amazing things come out of that. Yes, it's true. Like eventually you're like, oh, this grad student we want to hire. I mean, when this person graduates, for God's sakes, let's hire them, right? But at the same time, like I saw just as many people say, you know what, I'd like to take a sabbatical and go do some research work. And like what comes out of that and what matters, I mean, who knows, right? Like But I think, especially in areas that are obviously related, I think it's just healthy for everyone. I don't know if I have a better answer.
There's another question about venture capital. How can universities and university professors better work or appeal to venture capitals?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, the accelerator, I'm very stuck in my own ecosystem. I apologize. But I think, and I just had a conversation this morning at breakfast over some of these academic corporation models for innovation and the intersections and what's right and what's wrong. I'm a big believer in diversity, like diversity of approaches, diversity of models. In Canada, there's CDL, like the Creative Disruption Lab, there's DMZ, there's Communitech, there's the Accelerator Center at the University of Waterloo, there's Velocity at the University of Waterloo, and then hundreds and hundreds of others across the country. In the ones I picked on a bit just for the region are all very different, right? They involve academics very differently. Accelerator Center involves kind of labs and professors and supports them in certain ways that they might never have started a company before, provides resources, tools for them to do that, help maybe partners them with somebody in the industry to help them get their company going, etc. Okay, it's great. Like, I think they should do more of that. Absolutely, definitely do more of that. Then like Velocity is more of a student kind of fourth year design project that looks really promising. How do we support those students? Or even third year project, how do we help them get into an academic environment, find money? Very different, different type of fundraising, different type of team building, different time of commitments, because it's not so split, right? Young students at university tend to be pretty monomaniacally focused on a certain thing, whereas a faculty member might have like a bunch of grad students and a bunch of competing priorities. Both important. Do I think they need to be chained together into some stream? I don't. And so I think we should keep trying things. CDL, like when I first heard it and met AJ in Toronto, I thought it's kind of brutal. Like, you come, you deliver, we give you money, you deliver again. But at the same time, for a certain type of entrepreneur that was coming out of an academic environment, it was very structured and worked really well. In the States, there's Y Combinator. Y Combinator is really a kind of accelerator created by people so they can become wildly rich. So they just tax every startup at a ridiculous rate, but yet they provide hugely valuable advice. Is it worth it? I've always said no, but the people who've made piles of money say yes. And so I think we should try all of them and continue trying them all.
We have a question from Mario Nascimento. Waterloo's IP policy seems to be a strong motivator. Their researchers, but is it a must to use the Waterloo style of IP policy?
That's a great question. I've always been a bit. I mean, I think they have the people there and the people that created it, and many of the folks there still strongly believe in it. I think we've seen some of the value about how easy it makes things for, say, a fourth year design a project that a group might have to turn into a company. I think that's great. I don't think that it removes potential impediments. One might argue that it also removes some value capture that the academic environment could potentially use, or the entrepreneurial academic environment, and recycle better. So I know people have tried different approaches to, I don't want to use the word tax, it's the wrong word, to recognize this, whether it's an equity commitment to the university at some reasonable rate, because it's the right thing to do. And some entrepreneurs, Ted Livingston is an example that people talk about all the time, a great guy in this regard. I mean, he immediately committed a certain pound of his equity value back to the University of Waterloo when he realized some of his own cash. And I thought that was great because it did help fund more opportunities. So I absolutely, I think different approaches are good. I also think that to some extent, and this is a personal opinion, I don't speak for anybody, when I was in my startups and I'm staring at a patent on the wall, well, I do it just to remind myself that I actually had a patent strategy. But at the same time, the patent strategy that we had was good and well funded. We paid for it, for real, because we had some innovations that we thought were really quite novel and needed to be protected. But the reality is, by the time they became relevant, our company had been acquired for 3 years. Right. Like, so I just checked the other day, these patents are now held, I think, for the second time by Microsoft, and I've never worked for Microsoft. And so and I was dragged into a lawsuit not too long ago where I basically said, good luck, I'm out, I don't own this stuff anymore. And so, yeah, what did it matter? No, what mattered was execution, velocity, constant response to the market. And in that case, the patent holding aspect of it was irrelevant. Like, but that's not always true. If we were more successful, quite honestly, and had resisted being acquired, we weren't in a position to have done that. But if we had and become a very large corporation, it would have mattered enormously. So, yeah, no, I'm not fond of saying there's one way forward.
Have you seen examples where the IP is jointly owned by the university and the professors? How did that work? And
I'm trying to think of a case where it's been a problem. I can't think of a case where it's been a problem. I mean, there are obviously models where corporations create structures for academics to license their IP to corporations, right? And in that case, there's usually a negotiation that involves the university. And so there's sort of three parties involved in those kind of exchanges. And I don't think there's been a lot of animosity over it. I think if there's, and quite honestly, to be fair, right, it's possible that not enough value was extracted for the university in the forward-looking case when everything was really valuable in some of those cases that I've heard of. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a reasonable question to ask. I can't think of a case where a joint ownership structure has resulted in something that was possible not happening. Like, people usually find a way to negotiate through it. I mean, it's not the most complicated thing in the world. A three-way intellectual property agreement isn't likely to kill anything, as long as the rights are negotiable.
I'm going to read the other questions. Stephen mentioned being companies looking to work with mostly big research labs. How do the opposite movement work? I mean, which strategies can be recommended to us to approach companies with ID research proposal?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I certainly wasn't trying to imply that it was the university's responsibility to get this right. I mean, companies need to do it. I think that, and I don't have, are we talking about like, so smaller universities with a larger company? Was the question?
Yeah. Smaller universities.
Well, I mean, a lot of large companies have fairly large organizations dedicated to interactions with the university, and it's a trick to find the right person. It's like any startup, you need to find the right person who's trying to sell them something, and basically you're trying to sell them on your relationship value. So, I mean, you need to understand what they care about. I'm just basically a product. You've now become the lead salesperson for your own little startup, which is your startup of ideas. And so you need to understand the person you're trying to sell to. So what are they interested in? What kind of problems are they trying to solve? Who are the people? LinkedIn is a great profile, great tool for all salespeople. How do I find a relationship there to have a conversation with that person? And in a company like Google, which is huge and very flat, right? What people misunderstand is that you need the top person at the top of some giant triangle, and that's never true. Like Google, it's for sure not true. It's not even helpful usually. And so what you need is the person who's most aligned with yourself, whether it's a research relationship. And so you probably know someone who knows the person you want already, the person you want to speak with. And so my advice would be to talk to people who've been there, people who understand that entity, whether it's a company or a lab, and understand how that organization works, understand the key players in it, understand the researchers in it. And if you can find a researcher on the team that you would like to work with, I mean, that's as good a start as any. My experience with people is, well, not always positive. It's usually that they're curious. And so if you can explain why your work is interesting and relevant to them, not to you, but to them, I think it'll increase your chances of hitting some success. I know there's lots of companies which are hierarchical and secretive. Apple's much more secretive around its research work than Google is. But again, I would find the right person or a relationship and start from that.
Okay. Another question from Brian Fraser. Do you have any thoughts on academic partnering with nonprofit organizations, for example, student groups in an undergrad course creating software needed by charities working in other parts of the world, which cannot pay for software development?
Right. So I have had good experiences with this. I think if you think of a corporate goal, one of the great, if you're a reasonably competent engineering leader at a large corporation, one of your goals is to make sure always that the people that work for you are fulfilled, are finding what they need in life. You're doing everything you can to support them in their goals, whether it's to stay with your company or not. and help them advance their personal development. And so there's very few better ways than to encourage and empower people to spend time with nonprofits. Several examples come to mind. One at Google was I had some conversations with one of the lead technologists for the government of Canada, and we had some great conversations. Very interesting fellow, and he's like, "Well, why don't we figure out a way to do some kind of an internship?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'd love to do that." Like, no idea how this was going to work, and we thought about it for a while, talked to some people, and basically said, "Hey, who's interested in spending some time with the federal government solving some of their IT problems?" And I was virtually certain that I would get 10 people, had about 30 interested. We ended up sending one person who was particularly competent and passionate about it. And the first 3 months were really hard. Second 3 months were really amazing. And it was just an example of how you just put good-willed, open-minded, creative people together with domain experts. The people there were domain experts, and they made some huge inroads on things. And we learned a lot about government software development and processes and things, and a lot of really interesting observations about the kinds of problems they had that we did not have. Right. So we learned things. The internal presentation when our returning software leader came back were just amazing, and they loved him. Like, there were tears when he left, and that's a great example. And so we learned some things on a corporate level. They learned some things about how to deal with certain types of new software approaches to infrastructure. And I think ultimately the person that went on this program came back really valuing our company even more because we empowered him to do that. So, I mean, I constantly tell people when I was working at Google, look, okay, you're working hard on your thing. You really need to be spending 10% of your time on something else, like volunteer internally, train, mentor somebody, get out in the community, spend time on your personal passion project if that's what you want, volunteer at a research lab, help the food bank, do whatever. So just get out, right? And it is a little tricky sometimes with software development, but with nonprofits, it's really easy because there is no intellectual property to worry about. It's just, how do I get this to work? How do I support this group? How do I track, I don't know, distribution of rapid tests or something, like some of the great things that were done during the pandemic. Like, how do we support a team trying to do those kind of things? How do we show them how to use our tools? Not because we want to sell them. I'll give you one more example. So almost for sure, the nationally most impactful thing we ever did at Google was a 20% project, almost for sure. Like, no, I'm not talking about money or whatever, but from a point of long-term human impact. So we struggled with how to deal with elementary schools and school boards. It was just not our thing. And we just beat our head. Hey, we like you to learn more computer science. Like, we'd like you to teach computer science differently. We think your way you're teaching it is not working. Like, why are there no women and all doing this? Like, we have some research, listen to us, it just was a disaster. And we just smashed our head against the wall. And eventually this is because we're stupid. Like, eventually we got around to, what, maybe we should just hire someone who knows what they're doing. And we did. And we found this amazing person who spent their career in education, in public school boards, had been an administrator and an educator. And this person was hoping for, I think, a lovely retirement. And we were like, you know what, have we got a deal for you? Like, instead of this lovely retirement and travel and all those things, instead, why don't you come and just fix all of our broken approach to public school boards and computer science education? And she came and basically was lovely about telling us how wrong we were, and took the resources we were able to give her and just did amazing things in advocating new approaches to science, technology, engineering, and math in school. And, for those of you that are familiar, if you're gonna maintain, I'm just picking on female diversity because it's sort of an easy one to target. And so, if you're gonna lose a young female who has an interest in science, technology, engineering, math, you're gonna lose them around grade 6, grade 7, grade 8. That's when you lose them, and it's virtually impossible to get them back. There's a bunch of studies about this, and so you need to show them why this is meaningful to them. And you need to address real concerns about culture and things like that in some engineering organizations for certain, and not only with them, but with their families and with teachers. But also you need to be able to teach them actual practical hands-on experience of building things. And we're in a time when you can get Minecraft or Roblox and build some amazing stuff. Like you can build things with great tools, right? Like, and so how do you take advantage of that, connect that to real world examples, because not everybody relates to computer games, and say, hey, you know what, you could be the person that helps solve the next pandemic. And here's how artificial intelligence might play into that. So it's a tool, it's not an outcome, it's not an endpoint, but solving a medical problem, like finding a way to prevent the next major disease. These are things you as a child or a student, an aspiring scientist can do. And here's a tool. And by the way, could you please just teach some computer science problem? And that has been enormously successful and unbelievably successful. The numbers are impossibly good in Canada. And it is totally a credit to us advocating for her, empowering her to do this, and just encouraging volunteers all over the place to support her. And so that's probably the best example. And the people involved in that probably got more value out of that on their human experience, like how they feel about themselves and their employer from that than anything they launched at Google, improving Gmail.
Interesting. How do you see the role of government in stimulating university industry collaborations? For instance, NSERC has programs, and ISET, Innovation, Science, and Economic Development, has also some programs. So how do you see their role, and how these programs should be tailored, adjusted to better work with?
I have data points rather than the experience that you do. And so I'm very hesitant on these kind of questions because I sort of value experts, but nonetheless, I have data points, right? That's just points on a continuum. Like when I was a grad student, I couldn't have afforded the focus on research I had. When I came to University of Waterloo, I was not destitute, but I was somebody who had to work to get the money to go to university, and my parents supported me how they could. And so being able to be funded by NSERC during that time, and I was not a province student, so I was, national programs were critical to me, was an enormous thing for me. And so I have nothing but, great. I had to meet obligations. I had to produce reports. I had to produce publications and all the rest of those things that one does. But it was totally a amazing thing that would have probably stopped me from going to university, my second time, if I had not had that kind of support. So there's that. And I was part of a research lab that had similar kinds of funding through my supervisor. I was a member of the lab and had research responsibilities as well as part of that lab group, again funded. In that case, I'm just picking on NSERC because it's in my mind, but again funded by NSERC. And I've forgotten the specific program or industrial chair opportunity, but it was like that. So huge impact on me, on my life, and those of my other students that I went to school with in grad school. I had other relationships. So that's sort of the end of my NSERC relationships. I mean, that's true in the United States, true with things like DARPA on a different scale, for reasons that aren't always perfect, but like similar kinds of huge investment in actually pretty basic kind of generalist computer science, right? Like, and so my postdoc research, even though it had nothing at all to do with defense, was funded by DARPA work through my postdoc partner. Again, in artificial intelligence, certainly. Applied to software reconstruction and safety, but nonetheless. And so, again, a huge impact in that case in the context of Carnegie Mellon, which is a major hub for bridging, I would call it, defense money with academic research, and is an institute that's bridges that specifically as a goal. And that's where I was for that work. And then in Canada, I think we didn't have any direct involvement so much with NSERC. We did have involvements with government research programs to advance, that were intended to advance, I think, primary research in corporations. I'm less clear the value of those. Like I resisted even taking, in fact, as much as I could, we took no money like that at Google. Like I just didn't want to do it. It didn't feel like that was something we needed to do. We didn't need someone to encourage us to do primary research. We didn't need a tax break for sure. We didn't need any of those things. And we found in many cases, the government wanted us to do them almost as an example of how corporations could use them. And we were like, yeah, but for us, like the time cost of doing them is not worth it. Like of all the things we had, time was the least, the money was the most. And so, you know, asking an engineer or a scientist to spend 3 or 4 days working on a research project, a documentation of a research project to meet a government requirement just felt like a waste. I had some promising conversations with the National Research Council talking about large lab development and how we could sponsor those, but we never really got too far down the road. And I mean, I see them in certain cases that are not so much in our industry, in my experience, bridging academic and corporations in ways that are interesting. And then I spent a lot of time thinking about SRI as an example, Stanford Research Institute, and how it bridged industry and academics at Stanford, you know, back in the day. But I don't see an analog in Canada at the moment.
There's noise going on around my office. I'm sorry about that. There's construction going. So.
I can't hear anything. It's fine. It's total silence. It's almost terrifying.
Adele is telling me to wrap up because we have reached the end of our plan allotted period. There's one last question which is very interesting. Do you think that too much academia industry integration could at some point be disaligned with academic independence?
Absolutely. I completely agree with that. I fully support academic independence. I value my classes and my liberal arts aspect of especially my undergraduate education, probably above all. Like, I think, as we've talked back and forth about some of this, like, I really think that in a world that changes as fast as we are, the primary skills of communication, you know, scientific thought, application for building things, because that is an interesting skill set, which is a different kind of thing. Working in teams, these are the core skills. Learning how to be a good corporate citizen is another, like, you know, which you can learn at corporations, or you can learn how to be a good citizen in all kinds of contexts. Parents, academics, like, I see mentors in my life from peers in academia, from my undergraduate supervisor. Probably a really sad day was when my philosophy prof passed away, my undergraduate philosophy prof, who I had enormous fun with in argument, because I learned to argue in an ethics class, right? And I loved it. And I just, no, I absolutely believe in academic independence. I mean, I think there's definitely an area of intersection. There's definitely value to be brought from one to the other. But absolutely, if somebody said you have 2 years to live and only, you know, and you get a chance to either spend it in a company or spend it in academics, I would go back to academics. So that's pretty clear that primary research and investigation is critically important on its own merits.
Thank you very much, Steve. I'm going to hand it over to Adele for the conclusions. It was a very nice discussion, an open discussion. Thank you very much for your time and your willingness to answer all these questions.
Really appreciate it, Mark. It's been great having a chance to meet you and talk to you.
I want to thank both of you for this really important conversation. It's really important for us to understand how industry and academia can work together effectively and what the value is to both sides. And Steve, your clear passion for both sides of the equation, having worked in both. I do love your answer that given 2 years to live, you'd spend them on a campus rather than in company is indicative of your passion for the importance of academia. So I know how busy you are, and I thank you for your time for this, and Mark for the really great questions, or sorry, the really great conversation. And thanks to everyone who participated as an attendee, and we'll wish you the rest of the day to be a good one. Thanks, everyone.